sbagliata, messa fuori, c'è Pirlo, ancora Pirlo di tacco, tiro, gol!
Hello and welcome to the AC Milan Talk podcast. I'm your host Samit Paul and you're stuck with me on my own tonight as we look back at a thrilling Milan derby, but one that unfortunately ended in defeat. I'll discuss my thoughts on the game, my player ratings and read some of your comments on Twitter as everyone is unsurprisingly upset and disappointed after what is Milan's fourth defeat of the season in such a big game. Looking at the negatives first, specifically Inter's first goal, really predictable for me. I know Candreva's caught a lot of flack in recent weeks for his crossing, but it was always going to be the way that he got one right in the Milan derby, and that's exactly what happened. Great delivery from him in his defence. Icardi, tidy finish, doing what he does best, but all too predictable for me. A bigger frustration though was the fact that Inter were winning all the little battles, 50-50 tackles. There wasn't enough aggression from Milan and they would seem too content to play, at their own pace to slow things down, and that just wasn't the way to go about it, to approach the game in the first place. In complete contrast, looking at the positives, we played with much more intensity after the break. We were fired up, we put ourselves about, played with more aggression, forced Inter into making more mistakes, which created our own opportunities, and we got back into the game. So looking at the positives, there was definitely a shift in the second half, and we've got to carry that forward into the upcoming games. Looking at Montella's rating out of 10 first, he deserves credit for whatever he said at half-time because his team talk certainly worked. It had the desired effects. The players looked much better. As I mentioned, played with more urgency, more aggression, and that's exactly what was needed in the game. On top of that, you look at his substitution to bring on Patrick Cutrone, who had an excellent impact on the game. We've criticised Montella in recent weeks for taking too long in making his changes. We normally wait till the 70-minute mark and we're 2-0 down before he makes a change. He acted quickly this time round. It was the right decision. Still going to give him a 5 out of 10 purely because there was just something lacking in the first half in terms of desire and character from the players, which is unforgivable in a derby. And in terms of tactics, we were constantly caught out down the left. There was no flow, no real sort of sustained threat to our play. And so for that reason, I think Montella deserves a share of the blame. Not all of the blame. Players have to be accountable as well, but Montella deserves to be criticised as well. So he gets a 5 from me. Switching the attention to the player ratings, I'm going to give Donnarumma a 5. Couldn't have done much for any of the 3 goals. Icardi's clinical finishing didn't give him much of an opportunity to deny any of those goals. Only reason he gets marked down is because I don't feel he was entirely convincing with his distribution. There were a couple of shaky moments in possession. So he gets a 5 from me. Moving into defence, I've given Musacchio a 6. Again, I think there were a couple of key moments in the build-up to the first 2 goals where he could have done better to snuff out the danger. But ultimately, I think he did well to help nullify Perisic's threat, and it was a decent overall showing from him, so I've given him a 6. In complete contrast, Bonucci gets a 5, and it's a real disappointment yet again. I think there's been more inspirational speeches on Instagram from him than good performances from the captain this season, and that looks another real shaky performance. The state of him in some of the build-up plays. I think there was one incident with Vecino breaking forward from midfield, skipped past him like he wasn't there, and that's just become synonymous with Bonucci's defensive performances in recent weeks. And the biggest issue that you have to take is the fact that it's just completely unfathomable how Icardi had so much space in the box for his second goal. Bonucci was seen marking space when he should have been marking his man, wasn't looking over his shoulder to where Icardi was. And you're talking about one of the most clinical finishers in Serie A. It's just completely unforgivable for Bonucci not to be, tight and man marking him in that situation. So another disappointing outing for the captain, and that's obviously only going to raise further question marks about him moving forward. So 5 from him. Romagnoli also gets a 5 from me. I think he was left exposed by Rodriguez, so can't entirely put the blame on him for the poor performance, but booked early on for a foul on Candreva. Pretty reserved from that point onwards, and I think it wasn't one of his greatest performances, so gets a 5 from me as well. On a more positive note, I've given Fabio Borini a 7. After all the criticism and doubts that were thrown at him when he first signed for us in the summer, you've got to give him credit where it's due now. He's been made to play out of position. He's adapted well to his right wing back role, kept Perisic under wraps for most of the game, defensively solid, defensively sound, played with energy, played with determination. and got the assist for the second goal. So credit to Barini. He gets a 7 from me, and I'm going to even give him my Man of the Match award. Frank Kessie gets a 5, replaced at half-time, and rightly so, in my opinion. I don't think he just wasn't at the races. I don't think he was in action over the international break for Ivory Coast, so that was the rest that he needed. But apart from one moment of brief quality where he set Barini free down the right, that was his only real sort of key contribution. So good decision to take him off at half time, and hopefully we see a much improved performance from him next time out. Biglia also gets a 5 from me. I think he struggled at times with the pressure and the pressing of the inter midfield. Tidy for the most part, but he gets marked down from me for the mistake in the build up to the second goal. Gave possession away to Icardi, who then broke into the box and got on the end of Perisic's cross and did the rest and got the second goal. So Biglia gets a 5. Bonaventura gets a 6 out of 10. Got himself on the score sheet. Was always determined to try and make something happen. You know, on a negative slant, you could probably argue that he was probably a little bit too desperate to make things happen. Should have picked his head up more and, distributed and create for others. But, in a game where I criticise the determination, the passion of the players, you can never fault Bonaventura in that department. And I think overall he put in a good performance. So I'm going to give him a 6. Disappointingly, I'm going to have to give Ricardo Rodriguez a 4 out of 10. We're talking about one of the most consistent performers for Milan so far this season. I don't think I've given him lower than a 6 in every game that he's featured in Europe and in Serie A. But unfortunately, he decided to wait until the Milan derby to put his first poor performance in. Couldn't deal with Candreva. Inter looked a real threat on the right throughout the game, and that falls on Rodriguez for not getting back and dealing with that. And then he gets marked down from a 5 for the moment of madness that gave away the penalty at the death. Some will argue that it was a dive and that it was a poor decision, but ultimately it was clumsy from Rodriguez to have both his arms round the Inter player, and that proved costly in the end. So 4 for Rodriguez, unfortunately. Suso gets a 6. Really ineffective in the first half. I think he struggled badly in the way that we were set up tactically. Was definitely more influential in the second half. Benefited from the changes that Montella made. And it's going to be up to him now, Montella, to put Suso in the positions on the pitch where he's most influential and at his best. He scored a brilliant goal when he was dropping deeper and making things happen and stringing play together. I think that's where he was best and most influential. So let's get Suso either dropping back or, if in an ideal world we switch to a 4-3-3, back on the right wing and getting him to create and really get back to his best. So rescues himself with a 6 because I think he wasn't at the races in the first half, but definitely much improved after the break. Andre Silva gets a 6 from me as well. I think he battled hard from the start to finish. Really tough for him against the two Inter centre halves, but and unfortunate not to get his first Serie A goal when he hit the post. Definitely think there's more from him to come. I think we need more from him as well. He's obviously got it in him to be more creative and more influential up front and be a bit more of a poacher in the box. But for me, I think he worked really hard, and I personally credit that and give that a lot of praise. So I'm going to give him a 6. Looking at the substitutes, Patrick Cutrone, first of all, he gets a 6 out of 10 from me as well. I think his introduction was absolutely crucial for Milan at half time. As I mentioned earlier, brilliant from Montella to put him on at half time. Battled for everything, lifted his teammates, set the tempo up front, filtered through to the other players, and he was on top of that. He was a threat in and around the box, had a couple of chances. Arguably, probably could be a little disappointed with himself not to have done better, but excellent impact on the game overall, and really happy to see him come on and do a job. Locatelli doesn't get a mark because he came on too late, but similarly to Cutrone, flew into a couple of tackles, showed that passion and determination that was needed from Milan in a derby, and unfortunately we've not seen as much of Locatelli as I would have liked so far this season, but fingers crossed. Biglia looking tired at the end of this game. I think hopefully we'll see Locatelli in midweek in the Europa League. That would be good, but we have to wait and see on that one. But yeah, decent enough showing from him in the last 10 to 15 minutes. Just looking at some of your comments on Twitter, Samir Mohammed at Samir Mohammed 72. Really good second half. Should we change formation? Samir, I would say yes, but I do agree with a comment made by Montella to an extent in his post-game interview. He stated that a 4-3-3 isn't sustainable throughout the season, as he believes that he's only got 2 wingers in Bonaventura and Suso in his squad. You could argue Barini could play on the right or the left, as he did earlier in the season, but then that opens up another source of criticism. Is he good enough to be in the team on the right or left wing when he's lacking that quality in the final third? So if we've only got 2 real quality wingers in the squad, then does it really work for the whole season? If we add someone in January, then yes, I would suggest that we should move back to a 4-3-3. But for now, I don't see it happening. But given that we've kind of switched to this 3-5-2 with Bonucci in mind, he's not producing the goods. We can't just change everything to suit his needs. He's as I've spoken midweek about this, he's a quality international experienced defender. He should be able to play in a back 3 or a back 4. And for me, I think we should switch back to a back 4 with him and Romagnoli in the heart of it. So whether or not Montella decides to change, doesn't sound like he will, but I certainly see the argument for the change in formation. For him, Samir says, my man of the match was either Suso or Barini. The flop of the match was Bonucci. I'm going to go with Barini for my man of the match. As I mentioned earlier, I think he was great defensively, good going forwards, energetic, and did all the right things. So Barini gets my man of the match. Flop of the match, certainly see where you're coming from with the Bonucci shout, but again, I've got to go with Rodriguez. Disappointing throughout the game from a defensive perspective. Gave away the penalty at the end, so he gets my flop of the match award, if you like. Daniel at Dan Rossoneri says Montella must drop Bonucci and play 4-3-3 again. As I mentioned just a minute ago, yes, completely understand that argument. I don't think he will drop Bonucci. I think, as he mentioned in midweek, he believes that Bonucci is being made the scapegoat because he is the superstar defender in the team, and sounds pretty much like he's going to throw his faith completely behind him and stick with him. I think it'll take a real serious drop in form and for Montella to consider dropping him. And as I said, I would like to see the 4-3-3 come back, but whether it's going to, I highly doubt it. Jerry McKnight, much better in 3-4-3, although I would have taken Biglia off instead of Kessie. BS penalty on Rodriguez, Bonucci poor. Again, common theme, Bonucci getting criticism, and rightly so. Biglia get taken off instead of Kessie, I agree. I think particularly in the last stages, I think Biglia was absolutely shattered. Obviously away with Argentina during the international break, so that kind of helped him. So I could certainly see that. A little bit split on the penalty shout on Rodriguez, Jerry. I think the case can be made that it was a dive and he went down far too easily. But like I mentioned earlier, it was just clumsy for Rodriguez to put himself in that position, have his arms around him. I think he was asking for trouble, and it is what it is. The penalty was given, and Icardi took it and scored. So we have to move on. Moz at Mr. GL, words, I have none. We were outplayed, especially defensively. Tired of all the hungrier than ever BS. Completely agree with you, Moz. As I mentioned, the inspirational speeches on Instagram are always great, but results on the pitch are what matter, and they're not arriving, and Bonucci certainly in particular is not delivering. Agree with you in terms of being outplayed in the first half. I think we did much better in the second, but yeah, certainly defensive holes to be plugged and much more improvements to be made overall. So guys, unfortunately it's another loss that we have to dissect and discuss. Please leave your comments below. I want to hear your player ratings. I want to hear what your positives and negatives from the game were. Do we switch formation? Is Montella under fire again, or is it down to the players this time? Leave all your comments and thoughts below. Always love hearing from you. Thanks again for listening. Please subscribe on YouTube. We'll be back on Thursday night for the AEK Athens game. Hopefully with a win to discuss and more positive signs from the Milan players. I think there are certainly positive signs to be taken from the second half. Whatever the message at half-time worked. We need to take that, move that forwards, put this behind us. We've got AEK Athens, Genoa and Chievo in our next 3 games. On paper, those are 3 games that we should be winning, and fingers crossed we do. Obviously that leads up to the big game with Juve on October 28th, so always important to go into that with a bit of form. But yeah, we're down in 10th in the table. We're slipping further and further adrift in the race for the Champions League qualification spots. And, again, it's not nice to lose. 4 wins, 4 defeats so far this season. But honestly believe that there's definitely positive signs to take from that second half. And we just need to kick on at this point and start really motoring on with our season. So fingers crossed that starts on Thursday. But until then, that's all from me. So speak to you on Thursday.